Okay, kids, we are going to go ahead and turn back and review our prompt one more time. Then we're going to look at our access vocabulary, and then I'm going to read through it with you and see what additional annotations we can pull. Okay, so our prompt. Jennifer Boylan's article, Buzz Aldrin Returned from the Moon, Then His Real Adventure Began, discusses life for Apollo 11 astronauts 50 years after they returned to Earth. How would we characterize 50 years, kids? Is that a brief period of time? Is it a moderate amount, or is that a long time? Yeah, you nailed it. It's a long time. Okay, so we need to understand how change can impact these astronauts in all of this time after their return to Earth. Boylan describes the challenges that each of the three astronauts faced as they adjusted back to normal life. And here's where our task begins. What challenges would a person face when they return home from a great adventure, such as living on the moon? Okay, so we're going to underline what challenges would a person face. And then we're going to underline return home from a great adventure. Okay. And over here, we're just going to paraphrase challenges after an adventure. Write a 5-paragraph essay in which you explain 3 challenges of your choice, include an introductory paragraph and conclusion. And then here's the key. We need to cite evidence from the article. Then we can also cite from personal experience, current events, and or history to support our opinion here. Personal experience, there's a fancy word for personal experience and evidence that we offer from personal experience. Does anyone remember what it is? It starts with an A. Yes, anecdote. Anecdote or anecdotal evidence. Fantastic. Okay, so we're going to have an intro, which will have our thesis. We'll have body paragraph 1, which will be our first challenge. And then body paragraph 2 will be our second. And body paragraph 3 will have our third challenge. We then need to have a conclusion, which answers the so what, the question of why does it matter? Why does what we wrote about this hypothetical great adventure, returning home and experiencing all of these challenges, why does that matter? What does that tell us about people, adventure, challenges, humanity, human nature, etc.? That's what we need to have as our takeaway. Now, looking at what I've jotted down just as a brief outline for our body paragraphs, challenges 1, challenges 2, and challenges 3, is there some component of an essay that I'm missing in those body paragraphs? Is there something that I should be acknowledging? Tell me in the chat. We're definitely going to need the hook for the intro. You're absolutely right, but I'm going to focus on what you said for the body paragraphs because you're absolutely right. Somebody said CA, and CA stands, of course, for a counter argument. And where we have a counter argument or an acknowledgement of an opposing viewpoint, we also have to have a what? You're close. Definitely an example, but the academic term for that example is going to be a rebuttal. I always think with the word rebuttal of a couple of rams that are butting heads because they have different ideas of where they should go or what they should do. Why would we have a counter argument and a rebuttal if this isn't a strictly academic argumentative essay? Does anyone know the answer to that? Can anyone remind me? Because it does say to support your opinion, and we're giving our opinion about what types of challenges somebody might face when they come home from a great adventure. So why, if this is more opinion-based and we're writing about challenges that someone could have after they come home from an adventure, Why in an essay like that would I want you to still have some acknowledgement of a counter argument and a rebuttal? And yes, Tiff, it is. Yeah, Sissy, you're right. And I'm going to add a word there. It is my opinion, and having the ability to acknowledge that other people disagree strengthens my position. If we were having a conversation about cats and dogs, and all I say are that dogs are great and puppies are cute, and that's it. You're just going to think, oh, well, she's a dog person, so I'm not really going to be concerned with her opinion because it's only focused on dogs. But if I say that I love to have dogs as pets, and then I acknowledge that some people prefer cats, and in fact, we had a class representative cat named Cherry that was the best cat anybody could ever ask for, even though I knew that fantastic cat existed, I still would own a dog. Now you might be more inclined to listen to my position because you're like, well, it's clear that she likes dogs, but she's acknowledged that there are other great pets. So I'm going to listen to the reasons that she gives me. You strengthen your position in rhetoric, which is the art of writing and speaking persuasively, when you can acknowledge that not everybody will agree with you, whether it's strictly an argument, whether it's an opinion, whether it's persuasion. Even if I'm giving information and the information I'm giving casts something in a positive light, I might still acknowledge that not all consumers like the iPhone. Some prefer Samsung or Android. Okay. So this is the task at hand for us. We are asked to cite evidence from the article in crafting our own essays. So we need to look for little things that might speak to challenges because that might be something that we can pull in. Right. Okay. I'm going to start going back. I want to take a moment, though, to just address some of the vocabulary in context. Destigmatizing kids, I'll have you write this on your packet. To destigmatize is to remove negative associations. Something that has what's called stigma attached to it is something like, oh, let's not talk about that. That's not something we want to talk about in public. Society has changed a lot in the last several decades, the last several hundred years, and things that may have been stigmatized before are not so now. And it's because certain things have happened in social settings, in political view, that have changed our thinking. They have destigmatized things that may have been scary before to talk about or to acknowledge. Okay. So destigmatizing simply means to remove negative associations. Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I would probably posit that there's still a lot of work to do there. Okay. Um, I don't see any vocab in context on this slide. So I'll go back again. Couple more words here. Transcendent, folks, is above or beyond the normal. So I'm just going to abbreviate with the first letter. So if you have a transcendent experience, it's something that carries you beyond the everyday. We are in the World Series right now, for those of you that follow baseball. I once won an award that allowed me to sit in like that first row just behind home plate. That was a transcendent experience for me because I don't think I'll ever get the opportunity to sit in a seat like that again. That's out of the normal. If I go to a sporting event, I don't typically sit in those kinds of seats. I tend to sit pretty high up, pretty far away. Okay. The anticlimax, anything that is anticlimactic is not exciting. In fact, it is sometimes disappointing. I always think of that in terms of what you kids know about narratives and stories, that the climax of the story is supposed to be the most exciting, the one with heightened conflict. So the anticlimax is the opposite of that. And then in the context here, kids, a sentiment is simply a view or an attitude or an opinion. Okay. All right. Let's do our last vocab word in context, and then let's attack these annotations together in this passage. Quarantine. You guys probably familiar with quarantine. It's just a period of isolation. And that's really just in case any sort of infection or infectious diseases could be present or could be spread. I'll put et cetera there. All right. Let's go ahead and get into everything together. Are we ready? All right. The chutes popped open and they splashed down in the Pacific. They'd been to the moon. Now, 50 years ago Wednesday, they'd returned to Earth. All right, so it's an interesting hook. We're using imagery in the hook, and we're also juxtaposing past versus present, correct? Yeah, because this is what it's like when they came down from outer space, but that day happened 50 years ago. Floating upside down in the command module, its exterior blackened from the flames of re-entry, they waited for the capsule to right itself. It was over, Buzz Aldrin would write. We sat in silence, three men alone together with their private thoughts. Kids, let's make a note here. Shared experience versus private thoughts. These three men were on this adventure together. And yet, when they came back down from outer space, when they touched back down into Earth and into the water, they had a moment where they could reflect of what it meant to them. And it's unlikely that their thoughts were absolutely the same. Use that analogy in your own life. When has there been a time that you've done a project with classmates, or you've gone somewhere with teammates, or you've traveled with family, and you've all done the same experience, whether it's presenting your project, playing on the basketball court together, or visiting someplace with your family? Yet, even though you had the shared experience, you may have had different thoughts or reactions or feelings about it. How many of you can think of an example of that? Tell me in the chat, just say me. If you can think of like, yeah, there's been a time that I've done something with others, but we each had our own reaction or feeling when it came to what we did. Yeah, I figured it would be all of you. That's not that uncommon. We'll come back to that in a few minutes. Oh, yeah, that'll do it. They'd accomplished, arguably, the most extraordinary feat in human history. And now they were home, asking themselves the question for which the computers in Houston had no answer. Now what? What do you do after achieving the impossible? How do you move forward from that? This, kids, might be something that we could actually build into our essays. One of the challenges might be after you've accomplished something that's been absolutely remarkable, how do you figuratively come back down to earth? These men literally came back down to earth, but how do you choose what direction you go in after you've done something remarkable? Okay, that could certainly be a challenge. They were picked up by a helicopter from the aircraft carrier USS Hornet and placed in quarantine to guard against alien contagions. Later, there was a ticker tape parade in New York, a goodwill tour around the world. They received the Presidential Medal of Freedom. They spoke to a joint session of Congress. How would you kids characterize all of these things that have happened? You would eat sushi. We would each celebrate in our own ways. Yeah, okay, so somebody said these are all different examples of recognition. Someone said celebration. You would go onto Roblox. Someone said this is all groundbreaking. It's a lot of what we would call fanfare, pomp and circumstance, spectacle. You're acknowledged. So let's just write public acknowledgement. And I want to extend it beyond public, kids. It's not just like your neighborhood, it's certainly going to be the world. Okay. Yeah, worldwide, international friends. All right. Let's go ahead and move on to the next part of our passage. At last, each of the men, Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and Michael Collins, walked through the doors of their homes, embraced their families, and plaintively said, like Samwise Gamgee at the end of The Lord of the Rings, "Well, I'm back." I want to make a note of this as well, kids. They went everywhere else first, then home. That's a delay. I would think if you took me to outer space, kids, I would probably want to go home and relax. And instead, I get back from this adventure and I'm like, well, I guess I got to go here. I got to be a part of the parade. I'm going to go speak in front of Congress. Now I have to be filmed receiving the Presidential Medal of Freedom, which will not denigrate that because that's the highest honor a civilian, at least in the United States, can get. But I bet they're still pretty exhausted. And those that have families, very likely, probably would want to go home and see their families, right? It would take a couple of years for it to become clear to me, wrote Mr. Aldrin, but that day on the USS Hornet was actually the start of the trip to the unknown. I'd known what to expect on the unknown moon more than I did on the familiar Earth, because life changes after an extraordinary event. What's a good analogy we can use here? How about my Harry Potter enthusiasts? For those of you that have read through the series, and I know some of you have, what does Harry Potter decide to do with the Elder Wand at the end of that series? Okay, some of you, yes, some of you have the right answer. I'm not going to tell you exactly what happens because I think that there are two of you that have thought about reading the series and you haven't. But he doesn't choose to keep it. I won't tell you exactly what he does with it. I'll let you get to that. He doesn't need to because after he's fought against these dark forces, his life has irrevocably changed. You were in outer space. Literally, no one else has been to outer space. They have not been on the moon. You are the only three human beings who have ever been on the moon at this point. If you are one of those three people, how many other people in the entire world can relate to your experience? This is not a trick question. Two. So if there were three total and you are one of those three, there are only two other people in the entire world of billions of people who can actually understand what you've experienced. But wait a minute, kids. Wait a minute. Didn't we say right here that even if you have a shared experience, you can have private feelings about it or private reactions that are not shared? So, my question to you then is how would you describe the feeling of knowing you've done something and there's pretty much nobody else in the world who can understand it? How would that make a person feel? I want to talk to Tiffany about what it was like when I first stepped on the moon. Is Tiffany ever going to understand? Yes, Sissy said excluded. Okay. I'm going to come way down here and I'm going to use words like isolated, excluded, lonely, sad. Yeah, very good. You guys are making brilliant connections tonight. What do you do after you've had a transcendent experience? Do you just go back to work? Do you change the way you live? What if the experience you've had is so remarkable that the rest of your life feels like an anticlimax? 50 years to feel like the rest of your life isn't that important? That's a lot. That's a lot to kind of contend with, okay? We're going to make a note. We see that these are all rhetorical questions, right, to guide our thinking as the audience. But can an exceptional adventure make life seem ordinary afterwards? That's the question we need to ask ourselves. Maybe it could, but that might be, kids, if I'm thinking ahead to our prompt, which we already previewed, couldn't that be one of the challenges that we choose to write about? That it's difficult to adjust to what normal is or ordinary after experiencing something extraordinary? Maybe, right? The purpose of doing these annotations is that it's going to guide us to what we want to write about. It's going to help us. Let's continue on. And when Alexander saw the breadth of his domain, he wept, for there were no more worlds to conquer, says Alan Rickman's character in Die Hard. As it turns out, neither Alexander the Great nor Plutarch, his biographer, said this, at least not exactly, but it's still a sentiment we can all understand. Isn't it at the heart of that song of that other great philosopher, Peggy Lee? There's a little bit of humor here that might be difficult to discern. A couple of older allusions here, older references, but we can understand this whole idea of crying when there feels like there's nothing else left to do. Feeling useless. There's a phrase at loose ends. We're going to write lack of purpose. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and Ryan, I like what you said about being depressed or feeling downhearted because I think that those are accurate reflections of how you might feel when everything else feels anticlimactic. I do like the idea of the anticlimax. So I'm actually going to come back up and I think I will change colors for a moment. And I'm just going to draw a little line over here because anticlimax might be something that I want to go ahead and cite. And I might even cite transcendent experience. And I'm going to circle change because I might do an indirect citation, an indirect quote talking about change and having to change the way that you live after experiencing something that's just phenomenal. I'm also going to put a star here because if I were struggling to answer this essay prompt, I can see that there's this question. Do you go back to work? That might be one thing I choose to write about. Do you change how you live? That might be a second thing. What if the experience is so remarkable the rest of your life feels ordinary? That could be a third thing. A lot of times, kids, when you are tasked with reading and responding and formulating an opinion or an argument, you can, if you're doing a good close read of your source, find things to write about there in case you're struggling. I know sometimes when I was younger, I might struggle like, oh, I don't know what I should write about. The ideas are always there for you to take if you can't formulate any independently. Okay. All right. May I move on to the next slide? Okay, great. For Mr. Armstrong, Mr. Aldrin, and Mr. Collins, their experiences back on Earth reflected their differing characters. Post Apollo, Mr. Armstrong resigned from NASA and quietly took a teaching job at the University of Cincinnati. Okay, so a resignation, and the key term here is quietly. Okay, so one option was to settle into quiet life. No, hun, you are not. He died in 2012. Mr. Collins became director of the Smithsonian's Air and Space Museum. Okay. Um, that's something. Find work in a related field. No cap. Today at 88, Mr. Collins says he doesn't think a lot about Apollo 11. I can't say I wake up every morning thinking, oh, Apollo 11, blah, blah. I may in normal times go a month or two without thinking about it, but when I do, it comes back with a great deal of clarity, more than I would have guessed. Why might it come back with a great deal of clarity, folks? If he's 88 years old now and he says, yeah, I don't think about it all the time, but every few months I do, and it's right back with clarity. Why might an experience like that come back with such clarity? Yeah, no, you're spot on. Because this is such an extraordinary, you use the term unique. Um, and I'm actually going to borrow a word from the prompt here and just put adventure, because that's going to just help me kind of characterize my thinking. Good. Of the three, Mr. Aldrin, now 89, seems to have had the hardest re-entry. He drank, he had affairs, he got divorced and remarried and divorced again. He wound up in the hospital, crushed by depression. Oof, okay. Three, we're just going to write depression. That's not an option that I would want. At one celebratory banquet, Mr. Aldrin was breathlessly asked, tell us how it really felt to be on the moon. Afterward, he rushed outside into an alley and wept. Kids, I want you to tell me, why do you think he cried? Why, after being asked about what it felt like to be on the moon, did this man rush out into an alleyway and cry? Okay, I like that. It changed him in a bad way. He was regretful. He felt sad. What if we were to tie this back to the idea of an anticlimax? What if for Mr. Aldrin, he never felt like anything else that he could do after that big moment, that big adventure could ever be as great or as impactful or important? And what if being asked about that time where he was at his climax forces him to confront that everything after that, how many years again, kids? How many? 5 years? 50 years. Everything else for 50 years has lacked the same purpose, importance, significance in his life. I don't think it was the same for Armstrong or for Collins. They seemed to pick their paths and they were fine. But for Aldrin, I don't know that he ever got past the great adventure. So we're going to put a little mark here and just put what happens if you get stuck. I don't mean stuck in space, no. What happens if you get stuck? And really kind of stuck in the moment, stuck in time, stuck in this idea that the greatest thing I ever did happened when I was 3 years old, and everything else now that I'm, 11, 13, 17, 22, 40, uh, nothing else matters. I reached my peak at 3. That's a really horrifying outlook. I don't know that I would ever say that that's true, because life is a really interesting series of adventures, kids. But that perception, I think that's a dangerous perception, and that would be a massive challenge if you guys were to ever do something like go to outer space. Yeah, and someone said just because of the memory for this particular man, I think so. And Sissy, that is such a powerful word. One of your classmates just said, and grief. Grieving, let's just add grief, because what might you be grieving? What might Mr. Aldrin be grieving? Old life, loss of new life, or like the continued life, bad memory, or kids. And this one is tough. Ooh, regret and pain. I like that. Let me add that. Regret, pain. What if it's not so much a bad memory, but it is a great memory that you'll never get to relive? Ouch. Takes it back to that whole idea, like you had your best moment at 3 years old, and maybe a fortune teller tells you you're going to live till you're 97, and you're thinking, great, I peaked at 3, so now I have 94 years of just being average. That would be something worth grieving. And again, kids, I need to say it again. That's not how life should work. Life is a series of adventures and growth and adversities and victories, and some setbacks. And it's unfortunate that in this particular instance, we're learning about Mr. Aldrin that he couldn't seem to get past that setback. Now, someone said, what if his crying wept was a happy sob? My question to you is, what word in the very next sentence tells me that it's not? What context clue can I use from the very next sentence to know what kind of weeping this was? Yeah, it's a heartbreaking story. It would have been heartwarming if he was weeping from joy at being recognized and thinking back. Yeah, that's a powerful context clue. It's a heartbreaking story, but it's hard not to recognize something familiar in this moment. Only 12 Earthlings from this time that they first went, kids, only 12 Earthlings have known the exhilaration of standing on the moon. But most of us know what it is like to feel despair, to wonder whether we are up to the challenges that our lives demand. 2 other challenges. It's not just Buzz, it's all of us. No, an earthling would just be a colloquialism or a slang term for a human in this context. Yeah. All right. Let's go on to the next slide. Mr. Aldrin is a hero, not only for his work as the lunar module pilot, but for his work in destigmatizing depression. Okay, so that's a good thing. We're just going to put a happy face there. One night while he was hospitalized, he looked up at the full moon. What I said to myself was simple enough. You've been to the moon. You did it, he recalled. Now get the heck out of here and live the kind of life you want. I've never stood on the moon, but I have had a couple of life-altering experiences, and I've wondered now and again how to live my life in their wake. In June of 1988, I watched my bride walk down the aisle of the Bethlehem Chapel at the National Cathedral. Yeah, I will in a moment. Wearing her mother's wedding dress. Jesu Joy of Man's Desiring played upon the pipe organ. At that moment, I felt myself transformed by love, lifted out of the life that I had been living and into a new world. We left the cathedral, our friends threw rice. We went on a honeymoon, moved to Maine, and began the adventure of the rest of our lives. Like Michael Collins, I don't wake up every morning thinking, Bethlehem Chapel, blah, blah, but I carry that moment with me. Sometimes on a hot summer night, I look up at the sky and remember what it was like to be that young and so in love. Kids, this is going to be potential for your counter argument and your rebuttal. If I'm going to be writing an essay where my great adventure was spending an entire year backpacking and hiking through Europe and Asia, okay, my whole year just exploring these countries with which I'm unfamiliar, and that's life changing to me. That's something that I would value. Then maybe someone's going to say, well, yeah, but that was an adventure for when you were young and it's time for you to grow up and be stable and live in one place and get a job and all of those things. I can acknowledge that life might demand stability from me, but look at this. I know that I'm going to cite this in my essay. But any great adventure can be one where, quote, I carry that moment with me, end quote. That's what I would cite. And I would tie that to my rebuttal that any great adventure, in spite of its challenges, does have some benefit. Does that make sense how I would use that in my essay? Yeah. Tiffany, can you clarify your question so I make sure I answer it correctly? Who's saying these three? Like, who's our narrator in this? Like, who's talking about his wife? It's our author of the article. Yeah. Standing on the moon, wrote the poet Robert Hunter, with nothing left to do, a lovely view of heaven, but I'd rather be with you. Okay. What's before you? And before you, I mean actually set before you, what's visible, what's real versus desire or memory or nostalgia. That's really what those lyrics there at the end are intended to make us think. Okay. All right. We have a few minutes before our break. Let's talk about planning before break, then I'll give you break, and then we can plan a little bit more to get a general idea of how we want to attack this essay, okay? All right. I'm going to come back to this planning page for a moment. Yes, I am. Um, Looking at this planning page, what challenges would a person experience when they return home from a great adventure? I want you guys to take these minutes before we pause for our break time. What are some challenges that you would face coming home from an adventure? Just start dropping them in the chat and I'll just start writing them down. Isolation, loneliness would help if I spelled it correctly, not loneliness. Solitude, lack of inspiration, lack of motivation, different, I'm going to use the word different perspectives, deciding future. What do you mean by future? Job or career, family, mm-hmm. Grief, dazed. Okay. Anything else that we can add to that? acclimating to, we'll call it the new norm. To acclimate, think of climate, right? To acclimate means to get used to whatever it is. Unable to like believe what just happened. Okay, trouble moving forward. Okay, take a moment and look at what we've assembled here and think about which 3 challenges might be easiest for you to write about. You don't have to tell me in the chat, just think, what might you write about? I'm going to group these 3 together, and that might be one challenge that I want to write about. I think that the lack of motivation and inspiration and the trouble moving forward or acclimating to a new norm, I can group these as a second thing that I might write about. And I think that this last part, deciding the future, whether it's job or family, might be the third thing that I write about, the third challenge. So let's pause there. Go ahead and take your break. Let's come back in 10 minutes. So at 5:11, let's look at this, assemble it into a thesis, do a little bit of at least a skeleton outline of what this might look like in writing, and then I will give you time to write. Okay, I will see you shortly. Enjoy your break. If you are back from break, tell me your favorite color in the chat so I know we are ready. Sushi is not your favorite color. Blue, black, black, red, another for blue. Okay. Black and blue are tied. I like it. Okay, during the break time, I did circle back to a couple of the slides that people had asked me for in the chat. And now I actually want to move forward again. And one more time, kids, our task is to consider what challenges a person would face after they return home from a great adventure, and then to write a 5-paragraph essay explaining 3 challenges. These have to be different challenges, okay? We then work together to come up with different ideas of what types of challenges people might face. And then from that, we were able to group the different ideas. And so if I'm looking at the groups, I think that my first challenge, and I'm just going to mark this down here, challenge number 1. Let me ask you, if I wrote a 1 here, and if I wrote, and I may not have written it, so let me do so now. If I write a 2 here, and if I write a 3 there, what order would you want to actually talk about these? Would 1 come first, or should I write about number 2 first or number 3 first? What would you write about first? I know what I would pick. Okay, interesting. We've got a few different ideas. Okay, there's no right or wrong answer. You're going to pick what you think makes the most sense to write about first. Okay, I would probably pick number 2 of acclimating to that new normal. But I think we'll go in order of isolation, loneliness, solitude, deciding what the future is, and then acclimating to that new norm. Okay, so challenge number 1, uh, feeling isolated. Challenge number 2 is going to be uh, future goals, like what we're going to do next. And then challenge Number 3, adjusting to a new normal. Now, we are going to have to come up with some sort of hook. I'm going to encourage you all tonight to use imagery in this hook. And you can even start with the word imagine, or if that feels a little bit too trite and too formulaic for you, you can simply paint the scene of what you want to imagine. It's been 2 years since you first stepped off the plane into Europe. And in that time, you have backpacked across 13 European countries, transferred over, and now have added 8 Asian countries to your list of places where you've lived, visited, worked, and explored. You've met people from all different backgrounds in all types of lifestyles. You've stayed in huts that barely stayed up during windstorms, and you were the guest at a high-end resort where various servants came to make sure each of your needs were taken care of. But now it's time to go back home. Then I could launch into the context for my introduction. Imagine you've just returned home from those 2 years abroad and have no idea what your next steps might be. Believe it or not, life after experiencing great adventure can often present a variety of challenges for the person who's had that adventure. Then I could move into the thesis. Okay. I think that for today, I'm going to use a closed thesis where I list what the challenges are. We know that an open thesis would simply be if I were to say there can be many different challenges that arise following a great adventure, many of which could prevent someone from leading a fulfilling life. That's an open thesis because I didn't specify what those challenges are. But if I'm looking for a closed thesis, I'm going to have to list those challenges, okay? Returning home from a great adventure can yield or produce. Give me 1 second, Shrisha, and I'll go back. Okay. Actually, give me longer than 1 second. Let me put this planning up and then kind of get you guys started. Okay. All right. And Ryan, I saw a bunch of messages. A PDF of what, hun? Let me know in the chat, but let me finish outlining this and then I can address that. Returning home from a great adventure can yield challenges such as experiencing isolation, doubting which goals to pursue in the future, and experiencing doubting and maladjusting to, we'll say, your or one's new normal. And I'm going to put that in quotation marks because it's kind of a catchphrase. Now, this is just a sample of what a thesis could be. I might write any other number of thesis statements, but this is simply an example of how I would outline the 3 things that I'm going to talk about. Now, and I do see a couple of different questions in the chat. I will answer them in just a moment, but I want to stop and turn it over to you kids to start writing in just a moment. But before I do that, I just want to make sure we have ideas of what we're going to do here. If my first challenge is that I'm feeling isolated, I'm going to need a topic sentence. I'm going to need an example that includes a citation. I'm going to need to elaborate on that example, and then I'm going to need a concluding sentence that reinforces my thesis. Um, One of the first challenges, or one of the greatest challenges of returning home after a great adventure, is feeling isolated. Now, it seems entirely unlikely that you might experience feelings of isolation, loneliness, or alienation following something that was so extraordinary. However, once you return, you realize that you may, in fact, be one of three, or I could use the quote from the text, the 12 earthlings. I may be one of only 12 people who've experienced what I've experienced. As time goes on and I want to share and reminisce and enjoy those memories, I find more and more that my family doesn't want to hear about my stories again. And my friends have other things to talk about, and I feel like I have nobody who truly understands what I experienced. In this sense, even though I've had a fantastic time with my adventure, I may in fact end up feeling withdrawn, sad, or all alone once I'm back home. Could you hear, kids, the structure as I talked through an example? You could hear my topic sentence. You could hear the example, and I told you what I would cite. You could hear how after that citation, I had to build on that. I can't just say I'm one of 12 people who've experienced this adventure, because then the question is, so what? Why does that matter? How does that help emphasize your point? Okay. Is this making sense? Any questions for me? We're feeling pretty good about it. Okay, then I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording on this portion so we can turn our attention over to writing the essay and then answering specific questions as you are writing. Okay? All right.